I guess it was about a month ago, September 16th, according to the Iraqi government, it's 17 unarmed Iraqi civilians who were killed by some Blackwater employees. And now part of the problem is that there's no mechanism for a criminal outcome if there was a crime committed there.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think we actually do have a legal framework on paper to deal with abuses, serious cases of abuses, and it's really important that we have one that works. The problem is we've got something on paper, but it's not working so well in action.
Well, what do we have on paper? Because what you hear a lot about is Order 17, which was back in 2004 when Iraq wasn't a sovereign country, and when they handed over power to the Iraqis, the U.S. said, yeah, but these independent contractors more or less can't be held to Iraqi law, although Paul Bremer has said recently that it's not a carte blanche, but there isn't the obvious, clear mechanisms that there are for soldiers in Iraq for the contractors. There hasn't been one contractor prosecuted of any crime the whole time we've been in Iraq, right?
Well, we actually did have a prosecution of a contractor in Afghanistan who was a CIA contractor who abused a detainee, and he was criminally prosecuted in U.S. courts for that. But that's the only case for serious contractor abuse like that we have. So,
and there are huge problems, right, because you have to fly everyone back because they have the right to face their accuser, and the accusers are in Iraq.
Yeah, okay, so basically there are three ways that you could hold contractors accountable. You could have trials in Iraqi courts, you could have trials in U.S. civilian criminal courts, our ordinary justice system, or you could have trials in military courts. Yeah. Now on the Iraqi side, you bring up Coalition Provisional Authority Order Number 17. People have talked a lot about how contractors would be immune in Iraqi courts. I think that's a red herring. If you look at the terms of the immunity, it immunizes contractors only to the extent that they're acting pursuant to their contracts. So you can make a very strong argument that if contractors fire unprovoked into civilians, into a crowd of civilians, that is not acting, those are not actions within the terms of their contract. So I think that's a red herring, though I think it's not a good idea to pursue prosecutions in Iraq because the courts there just don't have the capacity. You know, if you look over to the civilian criminal justice side in the United States, it's the same thing. People have been saying, oh, we don't have the laws necessary to try the Blackwater contractors if a case could be built up. And again, I don't think that's quite right. The existing law covers all contractors who are operating in support of a Department of Defense mission. So it's true, the Blackwater contractors are not working for the Defense Department. They're working for the State Department. And people have said, oh, that means they're not covered by the law. But if you look at the law, which was actually amended to be a little bit broader there, to say in support of a Department of Defense mission, you could say, you could make, I think, a very plausible case that State Department security contractors are operating in support of a Department of Defense mission.
You're somewhat in a minority on that, though, and you've been somewhat vocal in reading the early draft of your book. The central part of your argument is people are making too big a deal about the laws not being on the books. They're on the books, they just need to be enforced better.
Yeah, and I think that's important because people think that expanding the law on the books is going to be some kind of a panacea. I don't think that's true. I think you have to look at how it works in practice. Why isn't it working? Well, part of the problem, I think, is that we've fragmented authority to prosecute in all the U.S. attorney's offices across the country. I think we ought to have a centralized office in the Department of Justice with primary responsibility for bringing these cases. And that would build up expertise, and it would also, I think, enhance accountability because then Congress can ask that office, what are you doing?
Is Blackwater getting kind of a bad rap, or is Blackwater different and maybe even performing a different mission than some of the other companies that are over there?
Well, that's a tough question.
It is a very tough question. You're forgiven for dodging it if you choose.
No, I mean, you know, look, I think that the incident is very troubling. I think the Blackwater incident has become a touchstone for the national debate. They're certainly not the only group doing security work. You know, Blackwater employees have put their lives on the line. They've died in the service of their contracts. And I think we all have to acknowledge what they've done, those employees have done. At the same time, the reports are very troubling. The House report that suggests that the Blackwater contractors are more likely to fire than other contractors.
Twice as likely.
Yes, is very, very troubling. In some ways, I think that our government really bears the responsibility here. Certainly, I think we have to look into what role the Blackwater employees played on the ground, but I think our government bears a responsibility for managing the situation.
So we're now having this debate. Do you see the national debate going in a productive direction or not?
Well, I think it's helpful. I think certainly people are waking up to the fact that there are so many contractors performing so many functions. I think that sometimes a particular incident can skew the debate. So, for example, security contractors are only one small group within the overall group.
Did I read there's only like 1,000 or less than 1,000 Blackwater security personnel there?
By some of the reports, yes. Working for the State Department, yes. But there are other security contractors working for the State Department and also...
But similarly small numbers, right?
Again, it's very hard to get information, and partly we need more information. The best numbers I've heard is that there are 30,000 security contractors in Iraq. So I think that it is productive for us to discuss this issue. I hope it will take us into a broader conversation about when it's appropriate to contract out certain functions and will lead to meaningful reforms, both for accountability on the back end, but also on the front end, on the management side. We need a high-level, politically accountable, centralized office that can ensure that these contractors are subject to the same rules, that can report to Congress and give accurate data on the number of contractors and the functions that they're performing, to make sure the contractors are getting sufficient training in the use of force where appropriate, and to really be a point of accountability so that Congress can do its oversight role and the American people are informed.
Do you expect the change to come soon? Is this going to happen in months or in years?
Well, I think we'll get some legislation. I don't know how far it will go. I think that the legislation that's being debated in the House, that passed in the House, Representative Price's bill, is very good. It makes very good steps forward. But whether we'll get more far-reaching reform, I think that could take years.